This is Newsmax TV. I'm Ashley Martella. Against the backdrop of the Democrats' proposed overhaul of the country's healthcare system, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee is having 3 hearings this week on the climate change bill. We're happy to be joined once again by the top Republican on that committee, Oklahoma Senator Jim Inhofe. As always, Senator, nice to have you with us.
Nice to be back with you, Ashley.
You've heard the statements by Energy Secretary Steven Chu, Interior Secretary Ken Salazar, EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson, and Federal Energy Regulatory Commission Chairman John Wellington. Anything in particular that stands out in your mind about what they said, sir?
Here's the problem they have. The public has drifted away from their side. I can remember, Ashley, when like 70% of the people in America thought that, that anthropogenic gases, CO2, were causing global warming. That's not true anymore. And if people go to my website, inhofe.senate.gov, and look it up, I've given many speeches on the Senate floor talking about documenting hundreds, literally hundreds, of scientists by their names who were on the other side of this issue and are now saying, wait a minute, this isn't true. And in fact, we're now in the warming period, which is something that's been going on since recording history. It warms and it cools. There are cycles. That ended 9 years ago. So we've been in another period since that time. Consequently, the science is now, they're losing the science rapidly. The economics, people know this would be the largest tax increase in the history of America, and you don't accomplish anything. By the way, I have to say, since you mentioned Lisa Jackson, who's the administrator of the EPA, was there this morning as a witness. She's the one that I asked the question to a few weeks ago, and I said, now, let's assume that we pass this bill, and this is the bill that we're talking about now. Is this going to have a result in any reduction in CO2 emissions? And she said, no, it wouldn't. And the reason it wouldn't is because unilaterally in America, it doesn't matter what we do. If we drive our manufacturing base off to places like China and India and Mexico, places where they don't have any emission standards or restrictions, then it's going to have the effect of increasing, not decreasing, CO2. I guess what I'm saying is there is a level of desperation. This morning, the chairman of the committee, Barbara Boxer, allowed John Kerry to sit there for 28 minutes and make all kinds of statements. It's almost the same thing that we saw in the science fiction movie of Al Gore. They've all been refuted, and yet I wasn't allowed to refute them, and so that was a very awkward situation. So they're doing everything they can. It's a level of desperation I've never seen before.
Senator, by what they all say, they seem to all believe that man-made greenhouse gas emissions are the biggest culprit in climate change. Are they really of one mindset on that, do you think?
No, they're trying to say that. They're trying to say that, but every day that goes by, that's certainly science is no longer their friend. And so we just know that that, in fact, is not true. Now let's stop and think about this. If we were to have heavy restrictions in the United States, as are called for in the cap and trade bill that is offered by John Kerry and Barbara Boxer, that would be, as I said, a tax increase of about between $350 and $400 billion a year. Now, Ashley, I know we talk about these big figures and people don't really relate to that. If you take the number of taxpayers who file tax returns in America, that would mean for anyone who's watching or listening to you and me right now, if they filed a tax return, it would cost them about $2,000. I say about because in my area in Oklahoma, and Texas, it's a lot more than that. It's closer to $3,000. Now, why would you pass a tax increase that size if it doesn't have any benefits, even if you believed that the science would dictate that man-made gases cause global warming? Number one, it's no longer global warming. Number two, the science is not on their side. So it's just totally unreasonable.
One of the statements made by Secretary Salazar seemed interesting. He said they project there will be no glaciers in Glacier National Park by 2020. Now, Glacier National Park is in upper Montana, bordering on Alberta and British Columbia. How can he make such a prediction?
Well, I don't really know. I think the world of Ken Salazar. I knew him well when he was a member of the United States Senate. He's now the Secretary of Interior. And just like all the rest of the secretaries who appeared before us this morning, all 5 of them, they do pretty much what their playbook says. So consistently, they said they were giving the administration's drumbeat, and they're carrying it out. So I don't know. There's a lot of pressure that those guys are under to say what they want, what the administration wants them to say. For example, one of the things that was said by John Kerry, he talked about James Hansen. Well, James Hansen is the guy that he was with NASA, that had made all kinds of statements about how man-made gases are causing this disastrous global warming and all of that. And I reminded him that James Hansen was the recipient personally of $250,000 from the Heinz Foundation. And of course, that's who John Kerry is married to. And he was paid that amount of money, and yet he still says, why are we doing cap and trade? And I read his quote. He said we should be honest about this and just pass a carbon tax on the American people. And my response to that, as it was this morning, well, the reason they don't do that is because cap and trade masquerades the amount of money that people are going to have to pay in taxes. And so they would not be able to do that if it were just a straight up and down honest tax increase.
Senator Inhofe, you asked an interesting question of Secretary Salazar. You asked him if he thought the U.S. should be harvesting its own huge supply of oil, gas, and coal. Has he responded to that, sir?
Well, first of all, he understands that I was reading from a CRS report that was accurate, that no one can argue with, and that is that we are the #1 provider of, the word you have to use is recoverable assets. In other words, we have more energy in America. Our problem is that we're not developing our own resources. And so I said, you have said several times, and I used a quote that Ken Salazar has made, and that is that we need to develop our own resources. I said, now that we know that we have the largest reserves of oil and gas and coal in the world, and yet politically, they won't allow it. The Democrats will not allow us to drill. They have a moratorium on drilling offshore. They won't allow us to develop our own resources. I said, is there an inconsistency there? Shouldn't we be developing our own resources? At that point, I ran out of time, and so Senator Boxer said, well, he'll have to answer that for the record in writing. She didn't want him to have to answer that publicly.
Senator Inhofe, the climate change bill your committee is considering was written by 2 of the most liberal members of Congress, Senators Barbara Boxer and John Kerry. Presumably, almost all Republicans are against it, but do you know of any moderate Democrats who might oppose it along with you?
Oh, absolutely. There are quite a few of them. First of all, that's essentially the same bill as the Waxman-Markey bill. And in fact, they have even said, well, we don't need to give you analysis of this because it's essentially the same bill as the Waxman-Markey bill. Well, that Waxman-Markey bill passed the House of Representatives by 219 votes. That's barely a majority. Now, let's remember what happened back in 1994. They had the BTU tax. That passed the House by the same margin, 219. Now, it didn't even come close in the Senate. So in the Senate, you have a margin where they'd have to have 60 votes. And quite frankly, Ashley, right now, I'd be shocked if they have 30 votes in favor of this huge tax increase. There aren't very many, these new senators that are serving now, like Begich from Alaska, he doesn't much want to go home after his first term or his first year down here in the United States Senate and say, aren't you proud of me? I voted for the largest tax increase in history. They got a serious problem, they don't have the votes, and they're hysterical.
Especially since Alaskans are overwhelmingly in favor of drilling in ANWR.
Well, yeah, oh, they are. And yet, in our infinite wisdom in Washington, we know better. We know what's good for the people in Alaska. No, it's like a 95% issue in Alaska. And yet, and that's the reason why, to answer your question, are there a lot of Democrats who are not going to go along with this? There are a lot of Democrats, because for the very reasons we mentioned.
Oklahoma Senator Jim Inhofe, as always, it's been a pleasure, sir, and we'll talk again real soon.
Very good, Ashley. I'm glad you're out there. Keep it up.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV. Sarah Palin's new book, Going Rogue in American Life, will be released on November 17th. You can be among the first to get your copy. Check out our incredible free offer for Sarah's new book. Just go to Newsmax.com and click on the top banner for this great offer. Act today.